Who says you can't have fun at work, right? About 4 years ago, my wife and I sold our home in Beach Park. And the buyers turned out to be amazing people. You see, it was Eric and Casey Ness, and Eric and Casey work with our students here at Emmanuel. And so what's really fun is every once in a while we get to go back to our old house. But even cooler than that is every once in a while they find stuff that we left behind. And just a couple weeks ago, I come into my office, and there's this stack of old calendars on my desk. Calendars from 2010, 2009, 2007. And I started flipping through them because back in the day, which doesn't seem like that long ago, my wife was resistant to digital calendars, and so everything in our life went on a paper calendar. And so these really serve as kind of the journals for what it meant to be a Petersen those years ago. And I'll admit to you that in some ways it made me really sad as I looked through these. Like, take 2011, for instance. 2011, I was flipping through and I came on February. And the first weekend of February, I went to Texas for a conference. Second weekend of February, I was at Timberley for speaking at a winter retreat. Weekend home. The next week, though, I left for India for 2 weeks. I got home from that. 2 weekends later, I went back to Timberley. And I looked through this and I thought, my goodness, where did that year go? But what's weird to me is that in the moment, I remember being so excited about all those things coming up. These big, kind of life-changing, life-altering, we'll never forget things that I was going to get to do. Most of us would refer to these as mountaintop experiences, right? We have these all of the time. You know what they're like. They look something like this, but better is that you feel something like that. They're the moments that you look forward to, that you get an app to count down to in your phone, because you just get levity. You just get space to breathe. You can relax, you can enjoy it, or you know you're going to tell your kids about it, or their kids are going to tell their kids about it, right? You just know this is going to matter. But there were some other things interesting on the calendar, things like dentist appointment. But I don't remember it. Family day. I don't remember it. Some birthdays, a couple meetings. The in-between moments. The moments that were just the moments you're just trying to kind of get through to get back to another big moment in life, right? And what's even worse is that there are moments on this calendar that aren't on the calendar, but they happened in that time. Tragic things, things that we would call the valley, right? Things like experiencing death or some depression or a divorce maybe happens. Very different from the promotion or the vacation or the Christmas or whatever the case may be. And we will spend so much of our life looking forward to the mountains and avoiding the valleys that we miss out at the middle. And we live mostly in the middle or in the plains. Nobody drives to the plains. Have you ever noticed that? We are always driving through the plains. If you got excited about your Rocky Mountain vacation, if you drove, you know about the plains. It's just surviving, right? It's just getting through. There's nothing of note or significance in those places. But the older I get, in the moments where I get to look back, I realize that some of the real life-changing moments happened here. Some of the moments that I will never forget, that my kids will never forget, were not planned. They were not big. They were not flashy. They were just along the way. And what my hope is that we get better at being tuned in to the miles on the plain, to the moments between the mountains. Because here's reality, especially for those of us that call ourselves Christians. There are mountaintop moments, and if you grew up going to youth group, you know one of them was camp. You couldn't wait for winter retreat. You couldn't wait for fall retreat. You couldn't wait for summer camp because that's when you got close to God. You couldn't wait for Easter. You couldn't wait for Christmas because that's when it's like the spiritual light bulb came back on. It's in the extraordinary moments that we believe God shows up, that we believe God is present. And I think we are fatally flawed in that thinking. You see, what we believe is that God's presence is out of the ordinary because it's only in the extraordinary or extraordinary, right? Like, we believe that it's so big, it's like the mountaintop moment that he certainly can't be present, he certainly can't be active, he certainly can't be doing anything on the flats. But I really believe that we are missing out on some of the most incredible moments with God. And what I want to do, what my hope is for this series, is that we stop using things like God moments, because here's what I believe. Everything is a God thing. You've done this, right? I've done this. I did this week, where something miraculous happens, something unexpected, something big for your good, and what do we say? That's a God thing. As if the thing just before that thing wasn't a God thing too. And I believe that God shouts at us often going, I'm in the in-between. If you would just look. If you would just be aware, if you would just have your radar up, your eyes open, your ears open, and pay attention, I believe that we will find God in the most mundane moments of our life, the moments that we think we're just trying to get through. And what's so cool is that it was this very kind of discussion that Paul was having centuries and centuries ago in a place called Athens. And he was meeting with some of the great philosophers and high religious people that were in that area. And they were having a discussion about all of the idols that they had kind of put together and were worshiping. And he comes across one that says, to an unknown God. And he launches into this kind of moment that I think speaks into what we struggle with even today. And even though we think we know God, there are moments where we go, I don't know if I know God. I think he's there, but there's more. There's more. And so I want to look at what Paul said and kind of pull it apart and think through what does this mean in our day and age, because we're going to jump a couple thousand years. What does it mean in our day and age, and how does it apply to my life, like tomorrow when I'm sitting in my office, or I'm folding laundry, or I'm mowing the grass when it shows back up? This is what Paul said. He is the God who made the world. The unknown God is the God who made the world and everything in it. Since he is Lord of heaven and earth, he doesn't live in man-made temples. You see, in this day and age, with the people that Paul is talking about, they were obsessed with gods, plural, but even more so, containers for gods. They called them temples. There were temples everywhere, and it was in the temple where the special God existed for the special people. It wasn't applied to all things everywhere. It was just kind of in this place, and if you wanted to come in contact with this God, you had to go to this place. It's not unlike what your mother or your grandmother told you. Everything has a place and everything is in its place, or something like that. You can tell I was paying very close attention. But this is how people thought of gods. Gods go in their place, and their place is in the temples. Which means if I'm not in the temple, then God's not with me, and it doesn't really matter what I do, what I say, what I think, because I'll just go to the temple and pretend like everything went well between. And so what Paul does is he's going to raise three separate issues. But the first one is this idea that God lives in captivity. This is issue number one for Paul. He goes, listen, God, like the God, the one who made everything, does not get caged. He doesn't live in one specific place. It's not like you get to do like you think you do and behave one way when you're in that place, and then you can go to another place and do it all differently because they'll never know. It's not how it works at all with the God, with the real God. In other words, what Paul says is there isn't one place God isn't. There isn't one place in your life or in my life or in your friend's life where God isn't. And I know that we really believe that we have matured and we've grown up and we're just these veteran Christians, a lot of us do, but a lot of us still believe that God lives here. You don't have to raise your hand to admit it. But there's a part of us that still is so starved for a place where we can go and meet God so that we can have the mile marker moments, the mountaintop experiences, as if God only lives on the mountain, right? Like in a lot of ways, we think of God as a mountain man. He just lives secluded, far away, and he can't really leave that place because that's a holy place, and where I go every day is not a holy place. And Paul comes along and he says, listen, there isn't one place God isn't. He's not held in captivity. You know why? Because he's God. And he doesn't play by our rules. He doesn't think like we think. He doesn't even feel how we feel. Because he made how we feel, and he made how we think, and he made us. And so he's bigger than us, and he's beyond us, so don't think you can leave him in that one place. And then Paul goes on to say this, and human hands can't serve his needs, for he has no needs. He himself gives life and breath to everything, and he satisfies every need. What I think Paul is getting at, what I've experienced in my own life, is that one of the greatest barriers to me experiencing God's presence in my everyday moments is me. Because somehow, subconsciously, I started to believe that God depends on me. And that in order for God to be amazing, I have to be amazing. In order for God to do something amazing, I need to do something amazing. And so we get to this place where Paul says, but you're missing something about God. God is not the possessor of needs, he's the provider for needs. He says, listen, the God, the one true God, he has no needs. None. There is zero dependency on you. He's amazing in and of himself. He's important in and of himself. He provides all on his own. He doesn't look to you and go, please help me. We want to believe that he does. There's this horrible part in me that goes, God is lucky to have me. But Paul raises his second objection or misunderstanding about God. He says, listen, there's no such thing as dependency when it comes to God. Not only can you not put him in a box and hold him in a spot, but he is not dependent on you for being God. And so what we think is, until we experience something amazing, only then God shows up amazing. Do you see what we're doing there? We're subtly, without thinking about it, making it about us and our experience and our big moments and our wins and victories, as if that's what God needs to be who he is. And Paul says, no. That's not how it works at all. And so what happens is we look at the in-between moments, the in-between the mountains, whether that's a valley or a plain, and we just get tired because we're trying to drum up more awesome for God. And here's what happens. Born-again Christians become bored-again Christians. And somebody in here was like, amen, man. I'm just so tired of showing up for God. Like real talk. I'm just so tired of trying to make him look good. I'm just so tired of trying to impress my friends with my generosity or my hospitality. I'm just so tired of arguing for God all the time. As if it depends on us. And what happens is we're just trudging along trying to get to that next mountaintop where it's our friend in the baptism tank. And everything between now and there feels like drudgery. And we get bored. Paul says, wait a minute. He has no needs. He's not dependent on you. So you don't need to look at those moments as something you have to fabricate, something you have to put together. He'll do it all on his own. Do you trust him? And are you looking for it? Or are you trying to make it? And then he goes on to just kind of unpack that idea a little bit further. And he says this, from one man, he created all the nations throughout the whole earth. He decided beforehand when they should rise and fall, and he determined their boundaries. His purpose was for the nations to seek after God and perhaps feel their way toward him and find him. Though he is not far from any one of us, for in him we live and move and exist. You see, we sometimes are so busy doing things for him that we forget that he's not far from us. And Paul doesn't bring this up because God is hard to find, right? Like he doesn't say God did all this and made all this so that we would stumble on him because he's hiding somewhere. No, he's actually right in front of you. He's like so obvious it's easy to mistake or miss. He's not far from any single one of you. I sometimes think Paul would have said this line that we sometimes say about other things around here. Have you ever tried to ask a fish what water is? Their answer is going to be, I have no idea. What is water? They don't think about the fact that they live in water. It's just their life. It's just how they are. It's right in front of them and around them and everything. And I think Paul comes along and he goes, you're a fish. You just don't realize you're a fish, and you are constantly in water. You just don't even know it. Because he says when it comes to God, it's in him that you live and move and exist. In the presence of God. It's not something you go to. It's not something you find. It's not something you uncover. It's not something you drum up or manufacture. It's right here. If you will just notice. If you will just pay attention. So Paul's third kind of misunderstanding that these people have, and I think we still have today, is a misunderstanding of proximity. And without realizing it, we've actually begun practicing with a deistic God instead of a theistic God. And meaning by deism is that far off, made it all, did it all, but now is far off and busy with other things, not totally interested, kind of wound up the clapping monkey and just let us go. And Paul says, no, that's not the God. The God is closer than you think. The God is more interested in you than you think. The God is paying more attention than you think because he's not held captive in some temple. He's not dependent on you being amazing, and he's never further than your next breath. He is right here among you now. And even better would be you are among him. He's present. You see, the truth is, I think of it this way. God's presence is only rare because we neglect to notice it. We only think of God's presence as extraordinary or as something other, or the mountain that we're driving through the plains to get to, simply because we're not noticing it now. And I'm going to give you a spoiler. I'm not going to come to the end of this sermon and go, and here's the best way for you to experience God's presence right now. It's really as simple as this. Stop neglecting it. Start paying attention. Stop thinking that he only lives here. And for some of us, that's a whole new idea. We maybe came for the first time last Easter or last week because it was Easter, and you're like, I'll give him one more shot. And you're like, what do you mean God doesn't live here? I lived my life all week thinking that I was going to go back to kind of encounter God again. He came with me? Yeah, he came with you. Every single moment of your day. Because he's not dependent on you, and he's not captive in this place or any place. But what we have to come to grips with is this idea of noticing. That's a decision. It's a decision that we have to make. It's a discipline that we have to practice. Because our minds are going 100 miles an hour all of the time. And we are constantly bombarded with tasks and the next appointment and requests for coffee and all of these things just constantly coming at us that we're just trying to get through. For some of us, the mountaintop is Netflix at the end of the day. Like, that is the highlight, and we just got to get through all this mess to get to Netflix. But God's in that mess. He's in those ordinary moments where you are just getting the spreadsheet done, where you are loading the dishwasher for the 173rd time, where you are walking the dog around the neighborhood because that's what you do at 5:30. He's there. You have to decide to notice him. And part of this series will help unpack like what that looks like a little bit. But it all is going to start with you and I deciding we're going to pay better attention. We're going to choose to be aware of the presence of God. Now, Paul, in a letter that he would write to a church in a town called Colossae, starts to help us understand how decisive we have to be about this. This is how he words it in Colossians. He says, and whatever you do, whether in word or deed, do it all in the name of the Lord Jesus, giving thanks to God the Father through him. What Paul is saying is decide that every part of every day, everything you say, everything you think, everything you feel, everything you do is going to be in the name of Jesus. That this will not just happen to you. And for so long in my own faith journey, I wanted to just sit and have God like hit me upside the head and wow me. And I missed the reality that I have to decide to be wowed. I have to decide to be in awe. I heard this stat the other day. It was really kind of crazy. You and I blink so many times in a day, enough times for enough amount of time, that we actually have our eyes closed for 50 minutes out of the day. That's not including sleep. Almost an hour of your day, every day, is spent with your eyes closed. Now that's physically, but there's also the just reality that we walk around with our eyes closed a lot. So decide to open them and do things in the name of Jesus. Now, here's what's interesting. Jesus used this same phrase. He was talking about prayer, but I think what he was saying about prayer is so applicable to just our everyday life. And by the way, scriptures tell us to pray ceasingly, so it should just be our way of life. So I think it works. Here's what Jesus said. He says, for where two or three gather in my name, there am I with them. With them. Not I listen in, not I dial into the conference call, but I am with them. When they decide to gather in my name, when they decide to do things in my name, when they decide to pay attention, I am with them. Not on the mountain, not when they do it right, always. And so for me, everything is a God thing. I literally want to stop saying, wow, that was a God thing. Instead, maybe, and this would be crazy, as I shovel the driveway, I go, this is a God thing. Seriously. Or when I take my son to the doctor for the second time in a week, this is a God thing. I'm not entirely sure how, but it is, because he's with me. He's in front of me, he's behind me, he's around me. I cannot escape his presence. And when we start to recognize him in the mundane, I believe that our faith will actually start to come alive more than it ever has, and it won't require a single mountaintop. I love the way Paul Tripp puts it. He says this: if God doesn't rule your mundane, then he doesn't rule you, because that's where you live. Isn't that powerful? When you think about all of the moments in your life, the vast majority of those moments are mundane ones. They're moments just like yesterday's. You do them all the time. They're your routines. And it's easy to just go through those and hoping God shows up in that big thing on your calendar one day. But like I said, what I've learned is some of the biggest moments were the in-between ones. So what does it look like for us to be a little more comfortable here in the plains? What does it look like for us to see God as present with us as we drive through? What if we started driving to them, even? Expecting God to show up there, because he already is. And he came with you along the way. This begins to change the way by which we live our lives. You think of the most routine part of your day. You got it? For some of you, that has to do with children. For some of you, it has to do with coffee. For some of you, it has to do with chores. For some of you, it has to do with reports at work or meetings at work or the drive to and from work. For some of you, it's just watching another episode of your favorite show because that's just what you do. Can you imagine what would happen if you saw God in each of them? And so here's what I want to challenge you to do. When you get to that part of your day, like in 5 minutes, resist the urge to answer the question with the question that goes like this: where is God in this? This is what, for 10 years, I told students when they were going through a hard time. I'm saying you just got to wrestle with, where is God in this? And I kind of wish I could go back in time and help them understand there's a better question to ask, because the answer to where is God in this is always 100% of the time here. That's where he is. Because God's not on the mountain. He's not held in captivity. He doesn't depend on you having a good, awesome day or a powerful experience in worship. He's not dependent on you. He's right here. So when we get in these tough times or these boring times, let's stop asking, where is God in this? And let's start asking, who is God in this? Because he's already with me. And part of what I'm trying to figure out is how to have a deeper, more intimate relationship with him. And if he's already come with me, then this is a moment or an opportunity for me to get to know him better. You see, it's in the in-between where you really get to know somebody. I'm spoiled. I get up here every Sunday, almost, and talk like I really got this figured out. And talk like I've got this awesome relationship with God, and I never struggle to read my Bible, and I never struggle to pray, and I never struggle to be like Jesus. Come home with me. Or talk to my wife. And you will learn that in the in-between is where you get the real Josh. You know this well, too. You met somebody, maybe your spouse, but we'll talk about friends, where when you first met them, you were like, wow, they are amazing. And then you started hanging out with them doing normal stuff. And you're like, that's not who I thought they were. I think God invites us to get to know him more deeply in the drive through the plain states, where it's not flashy, it's not big, it's not overwhelming. You just get to know him with you. And what's amazing then is the answer to this question, who am I in this, becomes a little more clear. Because you're allowing who you are to be defined by who he is in the most mundane of moments. And so the challenge for us as Christ followers is to see everything as a God thing. Not some things, not the big things, but everything. One more thought. You know, what we read in the Gospels by Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John is a highlight film. Did you know that? They record the best of. This is like Jesus' best of album. And everyone ends with like the best thing of the best of. What they don't record is all of the walking. I mean, they didn't have a car or an express train to get from one town to the other. They didn't have a speedboat to get across the lake. There were just moments of walking. And I gotta believe that several of those disciples, probably Peter, is walking along and going, do you think we did the right thing here? I mean, it's been like 3 weeks since the water turned into wine thing. I mean, like he hasn't really done anything miraculous for a while. Maybe we made a mistake. We don't read about those moments, and I wish we could, because it's those moments where we live most of our life. But what's crazy is if Peter had looked up and instead of looking to the side, he would see that Jesus was with them. He was walking with them, guiding them along. And I think they would have realized an incredible truth, that in the valley is sometimes where you find the most life. Have you ever noticed that? The valleys are usually green and have rivers running through them. It's where things grow most easily. And that there's real beauty in the plains if you just have the eyes to see it. So look, and you might find that the most mundane of your moments are some of the most magnificent. Will you pray with me? Jesus, we get frustrated and we get bored and we get stalled out because we find ourselves in between, doing ordinary things, things that don't feel like kingdom things. Things that don't feel like big, powerful, spiritual moments kind of things. But I believe what Paul has reminded us through his discussion with those people in Athens was that everything is a God thing. Because he's not off in the distance, he's not far away. He's not locked up somewhere. He's with us. And so we believe that you are with us. And we want to live every day with that truth. Seeing you in our routines, seeing you in our ordinary, seeing you in the mundane, so that we can live life to the fullest, Lord, just like you came to give us. And so will you help us, give us eyes to see you in all of it. I pray this in your name, Jesus.